Welcome back to the Africa is a Country podcast. My name is William Shoki, and I am the host of this, which is Africa is a Country's regular talk and interview show about politics and culture around the continent. This is a very special episode because this is a very special time. Every 4 years, the greatest spectacle on earth happens. We are talking about the FIFA World Cup. Need I say more? 32 teams are currently contesting their national pride in Qatar. It's a tournament that so far brought a lot of surprises. It's brought a lot of controversy, and we look forward to what else it will bring. Joining me on the program today to talk about the football, but also to talk about the politics of the football are two very special people to Africa as a Country. The first is Sean Jacobs, who is our founder and editor, and who is also faculty at the New School, as well as Tony Karon, who is an old collaborator and friend with Africa as a Country, who teaches the politics of global soccer and the graduate program of international affairs at the New School, and is also the editorial lead at AJ Plus. And the two of them are the hosts of a very exciting podcast on politics and football called 11 Named People. So if you haven't seen that yet, do give it a listen, do give it a watch on YouTube. And as part of our World Cup coverage, we are honored to be collaborating with 11 Named People to bring you the latest on what is happening in Qatar. So, Tony, Sean, welcome to the program. I mean, there's not much to say about the World Cup, why it matters, why it's important. Africa as a Country has done a lot of writing about that over the years. And I think the one thing I want to first talk about before we talk about the teams, before we talk about who we think is going to win, which is the question I'm most keen to hear your answers on. There's been a lot of controversy over this World Cup, not only now, but even in the build-up, questions about how the award was given, questions about how the World Cup was put together, the migrant system that Qatar currently has, the allegations that 6,500 foreign migrants perished in the putting together of the spectacle, the now attempts by FIFA to effectively deflect criticism by pointing to the West's double standard, the people who are being defensive, the political football that is currently underway about the World Cup. So I suppose to start, I want to get a sense from both of you. Does any of this matter? Is this all grandstanding happening in the moment? Is there merit to the criticisms? Is there merit to the defenses being made? Should politics stay out of football? What do you both make of all of it?
I don't know if Tony, let me go first. So one, politics should not stay out of football. There is merits to the criticism, but there's also, like you said, a kind of ritual that the West does every time that there's a World Cup. Then suddenly they've discovered human rights. They've discovered, suddenly they have like this point where they feel to this point and no further. Yet when you look closely, so firstly, just as an aside, well, it's not an aside, it's a big aside. This is the first World Cup in which, in the lead up to it, that we've had so many people, people died kind of creating this World Cup, like regular workers were building the stadiums. So that's like a big flag that you have to at least say. Secondly, it is true that this is a government which is not democratic, all those. Thirdly, there was a lot of corruption that led on to it. But here's the problem with some of those arguments. Part of the when Westerners make those kind of arguments, and I'll be quick about this because I know Tony's like, what's it, bidding at the whatever for this? He's like, no, I'm not. I think it's part of it. I saw Tony shaking his head. Is like the way I'm answering this is like there's a level at which I'm like, here they do, here we go again. Everybody knows the cynicism of FIFA. We know about the history of the World Cup, whether it's 1978 in Argentina, whether it's Russia, the way Russia got the World Cup, the way Russia hosted the World Cup. There's a documentary going on right now that even South Africa, when we know that it was in news, the level of corruption and bribery and paying off people. Jack Warner, they're trying to extradite him now to the US over the fact that South Africa, great South Africa, Nelson Mandela crying, lifting the cup, say, I'm going to host the World Cup. The World Cup's corrupt. Like regular people know that. The issue is more to do like, what can we symbolically, what do you put on this? What do you as a regular person put on this World Cup? And I always, Tony's tired of me telling the story. Before 2010, I was in New York and I was on my way to go to South Africa. And the big stories I kind of heard was like, there was films going around proclaiming how terrible the World Cup was. This sort of, but it was also done by a lot of people who never care about football. Suddenly they wake up, now they've discovered football and they're just going off. But the point was, I asked regular South Africans, just like my brother, my cousin, whatever, yo, what is your view on all this stuff around the World Cup? And they were like, yo, the World Cup is coming to my region. Nobody asked these questions about Europe and immigration and not letting people in when they have tournaments. Why are you asking this only? So there's that. So I think to sum it all up, all these things are real, but I think it's really what make people in the third world. There's been lots of articles like, why aren't people in the third world saying anything or doing anything? Because they also know y'all are hypocrites. I think that's where this comes from. And then you basically, when you host it, we cannot ask any of these questions. You host it in the middle of like denying people access, kids dying on beaches, extensive racism. Then we must just say, no, keep doing a tournament. So that's why I think the problem around the tournament arises. And that's kind of the backdrop. I'm not saying that I'm oblivious to all these things. We're not. But I think it's the hypocrisy that gets people. And then we're like, then it gets other things like the symbolism of Iran beating Wales. Like that's what gets us. That sort of, which is the Iranian team who put their lives on the line by saying, I'm not singing the national anthem amidst a political crisis. And Westerners who have been making all this noise and sucking up all the air. I'm going to wear One Love armband. And then FIFA says, oh no, we're going to give you a yellow card for that. And immediately they said they're not doing the one arm thing anymore. So those are the things that rankles and beats people up in the third world.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, in general, like if we take all of those kind of issues that are being raised, like firstly, how you get the World Cup. It's like what FIFA Gate revealed was that every World Cup since France 1998 has involved some degree of kind of what would effectively, at least morally, be called bribery. So it's like, I mean, I remember this when this thing first came out. It's like, oh, Qatar, how did they get it? I'm like, wait, do you remember Germany? How did they get it from South Africa in 2006? Like, basically, they paid a New Zealand delegate to vote against his mandate from his, thing. Now, this is Germany. This is like, the moral, supposed carriers of kind of moral rectitude and all of this. It's like, come on, man. The game is played a certain way. Qatar played the game. I have no doubt about that. And it's the same game that has always been played. FIFA is corrupt. Absolutely. Top to bottom. We've always known that. So it's like, I mean, this is an example. Just by the way, Sean will also be sick of hearing me say this, but in the class where people go, whoa, FIFA's so corrupt. How can you watch the World Cup? It's like, the parallel I use is the Catholic faithful who know that the church hierarchy, the bishops, the clergy have been involved in years and years and years of, all sorts of malfeasance, most recently in like the child abuse stuff and
Nazis
in protecting it. But it doesn't change the meaning of the mass for them. It doesn't change the meaning in their lives of sitting in the pews on a Sunday. That is global football fans and FIFA. Nobody believes that FIFA is a good, it represents righteousness or anything like that. But football means something else in our lives. So, okay, there's that. On the substance of the issues, of course, there are major issues of labor rights in Qatar and a migrant worker system, which, by the way, was inherited from British colonialism, which never gets a mention. Like, actually, this system was basically modeled on and, created by the Brits originally and modeled on the system of indentured labor that gives you, why do we have an Indian diaspora in the Caribbean or in East Africa? Because of the indentured labor system of the Brits. So this is not whataboutism or whatever. It's recognizing, gay rights. Okay, another one, important issue. Okay, and it's often understood outside of context, but that the when it comes to like if you think about, I'm going to say I don't know if continuum's the right word, but England won the World Cup in 1966, right, when they hosted. Gay sex in England at that time was illegal. It was a crime. right? But it isn't now. So there's like movement along a spectrum, and you kind of hope that this kind of connection and involvement with the world and being under scrutiny and so on actually helps to move things in that direction. And I mean, I'm not going to go into, all the counter arguments about Qatar is basically not a place where you can make public shows of affection, whatever the sexual orientation. Like I've known, of colleagues and friends who've gotten into trouble just putting their arm around their spouse, who, in an emotionally difficult situation, because in Qatar you just don't do that. So yes, I mean, this is like about moving things along. The labor stuff in particular, like the people who work on this stuff in Qatar, who work on actually trying to change, a brutal kafala system to something that's more that gives more rights and to those migrant workers. I've basically seen the World Cup has been important because it's shone a spotlight, it's forced engagement, it's forced changes in the laws. Have the laws been properly implemented? All the NGOs say no, like they need, to do a better job. But now they're under the spotlight, that kind of helps them. I mean, what I'm hearing as well is for a lot of people working in that space, they're not necessarily that thrilled about the sort of performative sort of stuff that they're hearing, from Western European governments, etc. I won't go into, there's like a media critique that you hear about that 6,500 number, which is, yes, it was counting every national from all of those countries over a 12-year period, whatever they worked in. So it could be teachers, they could be nurses, they could be elderly, etc. The point is, like, a number comes out there, and it's like it's not. Even the Guardian eventually says it's not, that the 6,500 number is not necessarily people working on the World Cup. On the other hand, the Qatari authorities were saying, well, it was 37 people. And obviously, a lot of the NGOs are saying, no, obviously it's a much higher number than that. But nobody knows the actual number because there's not enough, what's the word? Clarity is not the word, transparency in how deaths are recorded. So there's, all of these things are in play. They're like pushing to make changes, and the World Cup has been an occasion for that. So no, yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's saying this, this is a good situation or whatever. But is the World Cup making a bad situation better? I mean, I think that I've heard a lot of independent observers say yes. I mean, absolutely, this ultimately helps move things along. And so yes, it's an ambivalent thing. I mean, like, basically. And then, as Sean says, sorry, I'm rambling now, but you did ask. As Sean says, there's this kind of the Western media, particularly Western European and British media, of like the kind of shock horror, like, oh my God, like this is like, look how migrants are treated. And then, yeah, I mean, as Sean says, how are migrants treated in Europe? I've seen people say, the World Cup in Qatar is far more accessible to people in Africa and Asia, not simply because of it's easier to travel to Qatar from there in terms of airlines and stuff, but also because of visas, where, we know if the World Cup was being held in Italy now, a lot of people from Asia and Africa wouldn't be allowed to attend because the restrictive immigration policies and so on. So that's just not part of the conversation. I mean, I was sort of half joking the other day when it's a very serious matter, but the next World Cup is going to be held in Canada, the US, and Mexico. So wait, in the United States right now, basically any visiting fan for the World Cup is in danger of getting shot in a mall, getting shot in a gay nightclub, getting shot just about anywhere, and the government is unable to protect people from that situation or refuses to. Like, is that part of any, is anybody saying, oh, we shouldn't have the World Cup in the United States because visiting fans are unsafe? Because they are unsafe in that sense. No, nobody's saying that. And I would say, no, that's not, I would never advocate doing that. But in some ways, we need to think about like what it is that we're actually.
I'll add two quick other points. The one is, and again, like Tony said, all this stuff is floating around. So it's not like we are, telling you something different or new, but it's worth saying them. the two quick ones are like one on the sort of moral relativism of the West. Like the big one is the German team before their game putting their hands over their mouths. And I saw on Twitter some Palestinians asking, that's the same German public sphere, German government who's going after people who show any form of support for BDS or Palestinians. So it's like this it's a, the politics of this stuff is, or this is the same UEFA that has Israel playing in it, while Israel is occupying Palestinian land. The other one is, and this is, I'll say this quickly because I know Tony might say something about this. I think there's something else going on. One is Qatar to have a situation in which, like, who can host the World Cup? Who has the money to host the World Cup? You can host the World Cup in Italy or France or wherever, and then you end up paying for it forever. But the Qataris have so much money, they could pull this thing off very quickly. I don't think there's any debt that they are having as a result of this thing. This is at that sort of geo-global level of like who can run things and who can do things. This is messing a little bit with the European, I think, with the European mind. And more than that, I was hearing podcasts like last week. I remember texting Tony about this, where very like people that people value as soccer commentators or writers about football from The Guardian saying things like, oh, Europe and South America should break away and we should have our own like tournaments because we don't need the Africans and the Asians. What's that about again? Because something happened to FIFA. I don't think these people mean that, but before the Africans and the Asians came into world football, which is in the late 1960s, right? That culminates in 1974 in the expulsion of apartheid South Africa, which Europe and South America wasn't doing. Secondly, that's when Samaran what was his name, Havelange became the president and changed the way that world football was organized, where tournaments were being held. Now, you can debate as to why he was doing it. He wasn't altruistic. The point is just there's a certain madness in Europe about world football is changing. It's not the same. There's also people in other parts of the world who feel an ownership to football. It's their game too. And that, at some level, that is not good news if you have a certain sense of entitlement that this is your game. None of this takes away, as we said, none of this takes away from the fact that people died. There are questions about the way that the way Qatar got the World Cup, etc. None of this takes away from that. But I think that there's just a level of like very little self-reflection, which is, that's when you're sitting and you're watching Infantino, who's like not the greatest person in the world. And you're like, I kind of agree with him when he called them out. He's sort of bullshitting, but you're like, he's got a point. I got nothing to say to that.
It's like that meme of that one guy with that expression, and it says, heartbroken, the worst person in the world just made a great point.
I think there's something else. I mean, just following on from what Sean is saying, and the idea of like the decentering of the West and of the sort of industrialized North or whatever in this process. So, as a football fan myself, as like a football obsessive in the pews every 3 times a week, as it were, like
even more
or more. So, we know the epicenter of the global game is Europe, right? Like in some ways, if the World Cup is the United Nations General Assembly, then the Champions League is the Security Council. Like that's where the real power is. That's where all the world's best players show up. There's nobody at the World Cup who we don't see sort of every week. It's like the 5 Brighton players have already appeared at the World Cup. Like it's, so we know where that power is concentrated. Now, I was thinking about this and I was like, in terms of like the way this tournament's received, by people who don't think about politics is like, so I'm thinking, the base of European fans, and then I'm sort of, well, by extension, because I watch those European leagues, that's, me also. It's kind of annoying. It's a disruption of the league season. So what the hell is happening when you stop your season like in November and then pick it up again after Christmas, and then basically it's not in summer in Europe. It's not in summer, so it's basically nobody's on holiday everybody's at work, the kids are not able to stay up late, etc., etc. So it's just like this idea of it's like this annoying thing. But then if I think about it critically, holding the mirror back to myself and remembering where I'm from, it's like, well, the same thing happens with AFCON, right? Like there's always this irritation about the Premier League clubs having to give up their African players for a month in January, basically, and how disruptive that is and so on. But, you know, I'm guessing, I mean, I'm imagining summer, like the June, July period in Africa, when the World Cup normally is, nobody's on holiday. Nobody is able to kind of rely, it's the World Cup, it's part of our summer experience or whatever. So it's like, yeah, it's okay, it's moved around. It's kind of annoying for people in Northern Europe to get used to, but it's also the idea of sort of decentering things a little. It's a bit, you know, to use a popular cliche of the moment, to some extent, it's decolonizing things.
And I think this point about decentering is important, not only on the level of sport, but I think the big elephant in the room is that the decentering of the West is the lead story of politics in general, in the sense that there's a massive geopolitical realignment underway. We're moving into, since the war in Ukraine, into a multipolar world where the West's kind of undisputed political, economic, and cultural hegemony has been utterly shattered. And I think that the pearl-clutching responses in significant part reflect this fear and panic about the West kind of not being at the center of the world anymore. And this heightened emboldenedness, at least on the part of countries in the global South, to call attention to the hypocrisy and double standards, I think is terrifying for a lot of these governments. And that's why that's why they exhibit this kind of lack of self-reflection and go about sort of virtue signaling, and everyone is very quick to say, well, you're ones to talk.
No, totally. I don't know if Tony wants to respond first on this, but you're right. There's a, well,
yeah.
Well, one that I think there's a, where are the most interesting political ideas coming from about how to be human, like how to live better?
The Caribbean, sorry, if you ask.
Yeah, it's coming from the Caribbean with Mia Motley. If it's
I'm saying historically with Fanon, with Amy
No, but
Césaire,
in the present, if we're asking like in the present moment, I know what you mean by like Fanon, Césaire, whatever, Senghor. But if you're asking like right now, when you think about like, what does it mean to be human and how do we live fully? Okay, there's lots of bad ideas coming from the global South, Modi, Bolsonaro, but there's also, I think it's Barbados, yeah, like Mia Motley, who's the Prime Minister of Barbados, is coming with a sort of idea, like you know, she's consistent, like in the way that she's attacking like the moment we live in. Some of the great ideas about how do we organize ourselves politically to fundamentally change the way we live comes from Colombia, like what they did in Colombia, where they actually went and tackled, like, you know, the people who came to power are going to try and tackle class inequality, race inequality, the environment. You know, the sort of victory of Lula in Brazil, I don't know, it means like something more than I think when Biden beats Trump. There's like a weird, there's some, that messes with, I think it does mess with your sense of empowerment. And if you bring it to football, and I was trying to make that point and then I forgot it. When I said what happens in the 60s and in the 70s with the expulsion of South Africa, the election of Havelange, Blatter, Infantino, and all this, part of that story is also that Africa suddenly got, in FIFA, each country has one vote. And so you got more, there's 50-something countries in Africa. There's another kind of 50 in Asia. This is why they're saying, oh, if Europe and South America can break away, when we bring, I heard, this is literally what, I think it was, I don't want to mention names. And then the market, they said like, oh, and then we have the TV market of the USA and Mexico. I mean, it just sounds like terrible because there's a feeling of like, you've lost control. This is not about you would like also a better world. I'm telling you that Africans and Asians who are watching the World Cup, of course, they don't want to live under Qatari conditions, whatever the kafala. Nobody wants to live under that. They would like to move around, get jobs. There's nothing that says I shouldn't be from Bangladesh. and I shouldn't be working in Qatar. I shouldn't be going to Nepal. Shouldn't be from Nepal and working in Qatar. But I would like a decent life. And part of the story is like that Qatari system, as Tony pointed out, not just historically, but also in the present, it's the way it's structured. It's like the top tier of it, the people who run the oil companies, the people who run management, they're from Europe, of the very companies doing that kind of stuff. So that's where it just, that's why I'm saying, like, it's just, you're like exhausted. You're like,
but
come on, stop. Yeah.
No, that's good. I agree. But on all of that, but I think what Will was talking about, let's unpack a little bit about the geopolitics of the moment, because in some ways, this whole thing is a metaphor for the geopolitics of the Ukraine moment. In some ways, where like the sort of NATO countries, or at least most of them, are sort of like pursuing an agenda that doesn't resonate at all with the global South. And it's not like people, you know, you look at how everybody in the General Assembly votes to condemn Russia illegally invading Ukraine, occupying another sovereign country, etc. Like, no question. But at the same time, not prioritizing this over all sorts of other issues, to the point that like the rest of the world must pay for a sanctions regime and pay very heavily. The poor of the global South must pay for that in bread prices, etc. Because basically this liberal international order that Biden harps on about is actually a colonial and neo-colonial international order. It's a bunch of laws that are basically codifying the unequal property relations created by colonialism. And, you know, in the global South, and it's not even left or right. It's like there's this like, wait a minute, why are we prioritizing the question of NATO and Ukraine over the ability to feed our people? Like, that is nuts. Like, that's the kind of expectation. And there's this like idea of like, whoa, you know, you can also see it in football. And it's going to be interesting to see, because there's so much overt Palestine identification now in Doha at that World Cup. The flag you're going to see most often in those, you know, stadiums and in the crowds is the Palestinian flag. And this is also a comment on the hypocrisy of FIFA, that basically it's like 3 weeks after Russia invades Ukraine, Russia is kicked out of the World Cup. Its teams are kicked out of all the European competitions, etc. Meanwhile, Israel, which is basically occupying, illegally occupying Palestinian territory and systematically, continuously violating even FIFA's own rules, right? About, you know, settlement teams, etc., etc. And that's like, no, like, you know, we don't do politics in FIFA. Like, that's literally what they said in relation to that. And like, you're seeing that trend now in the global South, where people are just like, no, this is not how we're going to make the world and remake the world. And really, the global situation now is one where the post-1945 consensus among the Western powers is actually crumbling. Like, so much of what they created in the first few years after World War II, and the systems, the liberal international order, and the rules, all the partitions that they made, everything that was created in that moment, and also the denial of sovereignty that came with national independence. That, you know, suddenly everybody got political independence, but no control actually over their economic life, and suddenly that's almost boomeranging back, where you're suddenly seeing the same thing happens in Western countries now, where you elect a government, but basically the bond markets tell them what they can and can't do. And whether you see that as hobbling people, social democrats, or hobbling like right-wing lunatics, either way, the bond market, you're realizing we're ruled by capital, not by a committee of capitalists. We are ruled by capital itself. And so, you know, it's a very interesting moment where, you know, what you're seeing on show here, it speaks to very much the political moment globally as well, and why that liberal international order is basically on its last legs, as much as Biden, etc., would like to imagine they're reviving it.
Couldn't have said it better. I think to now talk maybe a bit more about the football itself. The quote which 11M People is inspired by is the one from the great Marxist historian Eric Hobsbawm, which reads as follows: "The imagined community of millions seems more real as a team of 11 named people. So, I mean, I want to talk about who we think will win, but I want to first talk about who we want to win, which is which team embodies the spirit of football at its highest, which team contains not only players we think can contest for greatest of all time status, but which would make for the best story of either overcoming adversity or punching above your weight as underdogs or whatever it is. What's a team which has the best story in this World Cup?
Well, can I come back with a slight curveball on the or reverse pass, Cruyff turn on the question of 11 named people? When those people are named Williams, that's an interesting moment, because which communities are being imagined when you are Nico or Inaki? And you know, and I have to say, because I do love that about FIFA's rules about acknowledging migration, essentially, that you can play if you are Inaki Williams, you can play for Ghana, where you were born, where your parents came from, or if you're Nico, you can play for Spain, where your parents migrated to and settled. And there was actually a beautiful moment. I was completely unexpected for me, but listening to the Spain game, when the commentators on the Fox channel that we get it on, Ian Dark and Landon Donovan, who used to be a US player, were essentially honoring the sacrifices that Nico Williams' parents made to get them to Spain. They're talking about them walking through the Sahara bare feet, and just saying, and Landon Donovan saying, yeah, and like, my kids complain when they get the wrong brand of chocolate milk, like saying, hey, everybody, like, recognize and respect and honor what Nico Williams represents in that Spain shirt. And the idea that migrants actually should be honored and respected, etc., in a European context, which is quite amazing to me, like, very, very powerful. But sorry, that's just so I'd be happy with either of the Williams brothers coming out on top in this World Cup.
That's like wishful thinking. That's like wishful thinking. No, I agree with your analysis of like the this kind of recognition of migration and movement, and that FIFA, for that I always love football. Football pioneered that, and now like you find it in other sports, in rugby. Actually, that's another thing. Oh, the Qataris, they're buying a team. France buys a team. England buys a team. England doesn't accept or is very anti-immigration. France is anti-immigration, except when it comes to the football team. If a third world country does it, we're all up in arms. Anyway, let me answer your question of like, who can win it? Who do we want to win? And who do we think best represents like that sort of Hobsbawmian whatever idea? So I initially wanted, and I'm going to show my ambivalence about these things. I initially thought Argentina should win this World Cup. And again, not because I love Argentina. I think I held my kind of residual thing about Maradona was, I love Maradona. But when you do that, what you forget is like Maradona and that 86 teams, particularly Maradona, is like the pivot of it, was an exception. He was an exceptional player. And so he made you kind of fall for some kind of thing about Argentinian football. But that meant like when you do that, you're forgetting and you're suspending what you know about Argentina and football, which is anti-football, cynical. It's not actually very good, and it gets away with things. And then you watch Argentina play Saudi Arabia, and they do exactly that. And also, Messi may be the best player in the world. When he played at Barcelona, you actually see what we've always known. And I think after this podcast, I'm going to eat my hat, as I always say, with pepper soup, because what if he wins the thing? But there is a history of Messi in the World Cup where he just falls apart. He just doesn't know, because he doesn't have like a good team that goes with it. Now I get to my second part. There's a 3-part answer. The second part is Brazil. So we all, particularly if you're from South Africa, like we're from Africa, South Africa, up until roughly 1990, Africans, they took but I'm old enough to remember this. You kind of it's not displaced. You put your hope in Brazil, because Brazil, whether it was the dictatorship, whether it was when they were becoming a democracy, but on the field, they were like the best representation of like what football could be like. I saw someone on Facebook said yesterday, Brazil is like again like it's the best evidence of when humanity created something beautiful.
It's always been a proxy for the global south, like Bob
Yeah,
Marley.
but also for like how beautiful and how imaginative and how wonderful football makes you feel when they play. So my problem was, before the World Cup, I didn't want to root for Brazil because Brazil's national team had all these players in it who supported this ogre, Bolsonaro, and there was like one player who we know is nominally he was on the other side politically, which is Richarlison. People hate him. I love Richarlison. No, Willie's a Tottenham fan. So I actually love Richarlison. I love that grit. I love that stuff. I've always liked players like that, whether it's him, Ibrahimovic, whatever. So I want to go quickly because I know I could go on and on about this stuff. But the point is, like, I remember tweeting before the game. I was like, so are we supporting Brazil? I will say this: Neymar is now kind of injured, which is like, that solves my problem of not wanting to root for him and his Bolsonaro things. He's out. In fact, I got text from Brazil, from a Brazilian friend, who cursed actually, that like, we're good riddance. He's gone now. We can actually now just, and then Richarlison scored the 2 goals. Richarlison scored the 2 goals. And there's a great one on somebody tweeted like the movement of his body when he made that like flying kick. They said they make it look like the L for Lula. L for Lula. So there you have it. So that's the thing. I think it's gonna build up like to this point where we're gonna start rooting again for Brazil, because Brazil just came. They were Serbia, like playing this negative football, not doing anything. Did Serbia even have a shot on goal? And here's Brazil taking the game to them, and eventually breaking them down, creating chaos, scoring the goal. And this is my last one, because I know, Tony, you're ready. Here's my last one. The one other team that I think represents something, and it's a complicated history, and I'm actually interested in it for some project I'm doing, is Portugal. If you don't spend your energy on Ronaldo and how horrible he is and all that other stuff, that's the one other team that is a bit like Brazil. Now, the way they got there is a complicated history. We don't have all the time for it. But like the idea that Portugal became almost like this racial country on a football pitch dates back to the late 1950s, when the dictatorship, in order to prolong colonialism, said that anybody who's in the colonies are also a citizen of Portugal. So they created a sort of non-racial identity politics, but within a dictatorship. And that's how you have Eusebio. That's how you have, there's a South African player, David Julio, who played for Portugal in the European Cup in the late 50s, early 60s. So like you have like a sort of the development of a non-racial identity in football terms. Portugal's not, the greatest country on earth, but now, I mean, I know it has a sort of social democratic prime minister whose family came from India, by the way, originally. But anyway, my point is like, there's Portugal, forget Ronaldo and everything that he represents. But the other team, I think, that comes close to it, maybe for me now, is Portugal. I would love for an African team to win the World Cup. I know that's not going to happen. But yeah, I think it's now, for me, it's Portugal, Brazil. I cannot root for European teams. It's funny. I could root sort of for Portugal because of what I know about its history, but I will not root for any of the other European teams. I cannot. I just can't. Tony's on mute.
You're on mute, Tony.
So much in there, because you're reminding me there of things like talking about Argentina. For me, like I'm much older than you all. So I watched that 78 final, and I was like, the way Argentina played that game, to use the South African term, fail. It was just horrible to watch. They were kicking, they were fouling, they were like, they were getting away with. They played anti-football then as well. So anyway, there's that. I mean, on Brazil, one observation, I think we all accept Brazil was this tournament was always Brazil's to lose, and they don't look like they're going to lose it. On the contrary, like they are looking amazing. One thing I would say, this is not exactly the spirit of 82, and 82 was a little bit naive, but this is definitely not the Dunga football of the 90s. So that moment where, after the trauma of 82, when they were the most brilliant team to watch, they were just amazing. Like, we're going to score more than you. So, you score, that's fine. We'll just go score more. And, like very loose at the back, very loose in midfield, etc.
And they could the greatest football of all time.
But remember, in the 90s, it starts when you start having Brazilian players starting to play in Europe. Like, they all go to Italy. And so Dunga almost personifies that. That Brazil win in 94, ugly, man. It was just horrible to watch. Sorry. But, it wasn't like flow. It wasn't, what's the, Bolsa Familia? It wasn't Joga Bonito, right? Yeah. So now this, again, like you watched that game yesterday, they're playing against a very, that Serbia team's pretty good. They had a lot of very good players, at least in midfield and attack. And they are like on the front foot, and they have all of this attacking stuff. And there was a moment like Alexandro, the left back, basically making a run for taking a shot that was narrowly wide. And I'm like, damn, that's Junior from 82. Like, the idea that your fullback is, and the Carlos Alberto, etc. Like, this is like, okay, this is closer. This is a mature version of 82, should we say? I mean, they're not loose and free flowing. The forwards do a lot of defensive work. I mean, Richarlison was doing defensive work. Like, whoa, that was just, so, I mean, they're exemplifying a lot of what's great about football, I think. And more power to them if they can win it playing this way. Couple of small notes, because I'm from Brooklyn. So in some way, what's Brooklyn's team in the World Cup? Ecuador, right? Like, there's more. I think there's more Ecuadorians here than I've seen any other sort of World Cup, representation. I would love to see them.
The Mexicans will have something to say about that.
This is true. Actually, I'm forgetting about Sunset Park. But yeah, I mean, but actually, I was going to say, like, coming from here, like, you want Mexico to have a good run for sure. You want Ecuador to have a good run. In terms of, like, what's the word? Like, counterintuitives. I have expected, now I can't say if this is going to pan out or not, but I have expected that Uruguay is going to be a bit of a surprise. That Uruguay will go further than expected. And again, they had a not great first game, but yeah, I think they could hit their stride. They just have so much quality. I mean, the back four are a little old now, but you're talking Betancourt and Valverde in the midfield. You're talking Darwin Nunez, Cavani and Suarez. Like that, they're a formidable team to deal with. So yeah, I mean, I could see Spain actually, like, this is a kind of refreshed Spain in a way. It's a strange Spain. Like, they don't take Thiago Alcantara to the World Cup. Are you mad? But they have these young, the Gavi and Pedri. These players are going to be around for years, and they play beautiful football. And then they also have some innovations, like that guy Dani Olmo. I mean, the guy looks like an English. He looks like an English forward from, like, 10, 15 years ago. Like, and he's never played at a Spanish club. He plays in Germany. So like, but yeah.
Wait, is Uruguay your Portugal?
Uruguay would be my Portugal. Yeah.
They embody for you, which for Africans are like, yo, Tony, what you're saying? They stole the thing from Ghana, but yeah, but we know.
What do you mean?
No, not me. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
Asamoah mother said, you should never have my son take a penalty. It's like, Uruguay went down to 10 men and gave them a penalty.
That's an easy pass.
Yeah, win the game. It's not we stopping you. You need to win the game. Yeah,
exactly.
I think no one's mentioned this team, and I hate to say it, but I think England may surprise us as well.
I'm speechless there, Will.
I mean, I'm not saying.
Okay, let me get on that. On our program, which we can recommend people go listen to it, we brought on Peter Dwyer, who's like a Scouser from Liverpool, and talking about that sort of ambivalence that he feels towards England, and even like us feels like most of us, we hate watch England, You hate watch England because historically, they won't stop talking when they won the 1966 World Cup, and some people claim they didn't even win it.
Football's perpetually always on its way home, and
like it's annoying. And then they won now the women's Euros, so it was kind of the end of that. They went to the final against Italy in the Euros for the men's. So you kind of then. I think
newsflash. Just saying.
Yeah.
Brooklyn just suffered a painful blow because your man Gakpo just put Holland ahead.
That's my favorite player for this World Cup. Cody. But I was going to say, like, the thing I think about England is it's a different England. This is now that front line is nuts. Like Jude Bellingham, which Liverpool fans would like to get. Sterling, who every time he silences all the nutcases and the right-wing British media. Saka.
Saka is amazing.
To talk about Hobsbawm's notion of the nation, because that's where Hobsbawm is mostly writing about, Tom Near and Hobsbawm and all those people. You should probably, I think we should, I don't know, I'm not going to do it, but I don't think there's it wouldn't be terrible if people rooted for England. My politics is from, I would never root for England, but I could see now where people are like, okay, I forget this arrogant media and
forget about the two Harrys.
But even I don't necessarily have a problem with Harry Kane. Harry Kane himself, his family are immigrants.
No, it's not that. It's just that Harry Kane's got that English thing of like diving in the swallow diving.
Yeah, he does it, then he gets away with it and so on. So if another player does it, if another player does the dark arts, then it's a problem. If he does it, it's not a problem. But yeah, no. England, you're right. They're a dark horse, but I don't know. If they win the World Cup, I'm gonna be shocked if they do. But yeah, they will go far. They will definitely go far. That's what you're gonna get from me on England. But as to whether or not I should root for them, I'll root for some of their players.
But I think what you see with national teams, so Argentina almost exemplifies that, and Belgium always exemplifies that. The question is, and I think to some extent England also, that national teams are usually reliably less than the sum of their parts. Like you take that same group of players, you look at where they fit into club football, and then you put them together as a national side, and you're like, wow, look at this on paper. But then, as the legend Brian Clough once said, unfortunately, the game's not played on paper; it's played on grass. And yeah, they're going to
come up. Here's what I was going to say when Tony was talking earlier, when he mentioned Spain, and I think even if we could bring in France into that conversation also, they won with these sort of Harlem Globetrotters kind. I don't know if that's a phrase. They won like Harlem Globetrotters. They were like playing people that they could bully and show off. They were not. Again, we're only judging after one game. Brazil, it was a real match. I would say Argentina. It turns out failed against the Saudis, so that's why people are like, "What the hell?" That's problem.
Belgium effectively failed against Canada. They were just
Belgium failed against Canada. France
failed against
stuff. France was showing off against Australia. Spain was like literally beating up on who were they playing again?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica, yeah. Costa Rica is another team that comes with the same people for like 5 World Cups in a row. Joel Campbell in the front is just it blows.
Roger Milla was 38, man.
You don't know there's any other footballers in Costa Rica. Like you kind of bring the same guy back every World Cup. So, but my point is back to my main point, which is like Spain, France, Belgium. None of what they did, and I'm not convinced. Brazil could get knocked out at some point, but Brazil. That was like it was like okay, these people are here to play football.
But I always like to do this thing at international tournaments about like the country that the absent present country, the country that's not actually playing in the World Cup that's most represented. It often used to be Cabo Verde for a long time because they had a whole bunch of players in Portugal, Switzerland, Sweden. I'm not sure for this one, but I have to say, like if you look at both England and Canada, you realize like the British Caribbean is actually very, Jamaica particularly, like very strongly represented.
At this World Cup, yeah. They're at this World Cup, yeah.
And which African team do we think is going to go the furthest?
For me, Senegal. and they won. They
Let's look
beat.
at the groups.
If you look at the groups,
But
Cameroon is like
Tunisia actually it looks pretty good.
Tunisia looks nice. Cameroon looks like.
Ghana gave Portugal a real challenge. I think Ghana is gonna.
But then Ghana's football is a little chaotic for me. I'm just being honest about that. And also, like Ghana, you can't like do the Ronaldo Sui celebration if you're losing. I mean, that was like.
Come on, man. Come on. Like, at
Do
least
it.
the trolling war.
When we talk about Ghana, Ghana's naive. Like, you score a goal, you go off. Andre Ayew is like hugging some dude. Oh, yeah, we just scored. He turns around the video. I don't know if you saw the video. He turned around and Portugal scored again. 2-1. It's like Ghana, like, you're in a World Cup. Concentrate. Ghana's history in the World Cup is except for that time in South Africa, this is sort of par for the course. If you go back, look at 2014 in Brazil, and you can see how Ghana basically like lost I think they almost lost every game. Or they drew like one game.
I have to say, one thing, if you look at the African teams at the World Cup, the one thing that stands out for me is like a dearth of African strikers right now. Of like top quality, and there's no Samuel Eto'o, there's no, I mean, Mane obviously is injured. But that idea of, a certain kind of player we were used to seeing, like as
Tunisia has a guy, I forgot his name now. He played in France for many years. I think he's on the bench or something.
For who?
For Tunisia. But he's a short, bald, kind of short haircut.
Yeah, Benacer, I think he's.
No, it's not that. But anyway, I don't see him in the World Cup because he's old now. But you're right. There is what, on paper, Cameroon should be doing really well. Napoli players at Bayern. But for some reason, it's just like they don't seem to do well in World Cups, except for 1990 again. Yeah.
Right. Because also looking at Senegal, like Senegal are superb at the back and superb in midfield, but like even when Mane was playing, they really
Senegal got unlucky against the Netherlands. Like they played well for like almost the whole game. And then I think they lost the game in the last 10 minutes. It was weird. It was like, hold up, this could have been a draw. You could have 1 point out of this, and then it ended up they lost they just lost the game at the end. So overall, I would say Senegal definitely for me is like has the best chance still. I still stick with my own old story. Maybe as you said, Tunisia, Tony's point, Tunisia is second. But the other teams, I don't have much for them.
Yeah.
I'm going to get cancelled for this.
I'm just going to say don't sleep on Ghana. I have a feeling they're going to surprise.
I can't we got robbed by them, like as a South African.
No, in South Africa, they were our team in 2010.
No, but for this World Cup, so the way it worked was there was the last group game, and South Africa was playing Ghana in South Africa, and they got this like crazy penalty that was not a penalty, which meant in the return match in Ghana, all they had to do was play for a draw. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm going to be slaughtered on Twitter for this, but yeah, I hold that grudge a little bit about how they got there.
Right. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
And this is the first time that every African team is being coached by an African coach at a World Cup. How significant is that? I mean, has it sort of do we think this is going to start an exciting trend in African coaching where we no longer outsource our big tournament coaches, or is it just an exception?
It's not an exception. I think you're right. This is something interesting is happening here. If you look at the AFCON, I don't have the numbers, but the majority of the coaches at that tournament for the teams at the last AFCON, the last African Cup of Nations, they were African. So there was clearly, even in the middle of the tournament when Morocco fired like their coach, Tunisia, they replaced him with the current coach, the current Tunisian coach. He took over during AFCON. So there's like this sudden move of saying we are going to begin to trust like local expertise. Structurally, it has to do with FIFA did invest a lot of money through CAF, through the Confederation of African Football, to train African coaches, to let them get their badges. The other thing is, if you're watching football, Senegal appointed Aliou Cissé, I think was it 2014 or something, and he's been around since then. He took them to the final of AFCON. He took them to the World Cup, where they, got eliminated on some technicality about they had more yellow cards than South Korea. It wasn't because they were terrible. It was just about technical stuff. And then they won the AFCON with him. The last AFCON, they won it with that same coach. So Senegal is sort of showing that you can appoint a coach. And my last point here is like, you have also the influence of the diaspora. Like, so Cisse is really a product of France, but there's a way in which African countries are now claiming those people. Otto Addo, who's the coach of Ghana, he's effectively German also, but Ghana recruited him. They brought Chris Houghton, whose father was Ghanaian and moved to England. He played for Ireland, but he's the technical advisor to the team. So there's also this like opening up and realizing, you know what? Well, maybe we can hire Hervé Renard, who is doing really well now with Saudi Arabia, or we have people that are just as good, who are African, of African descent, and we, Morocco, the Moroccan coach, grew up in France, and then when his playing time was over, he went to coach in Morocco. So you're right. I think there's a move away from the kind of mercenary coach that has done 8, 9 African teams from France, and we have no clue who that person is. So I think there's definitely a move to something different there.
I mean, this is totally unrelated to that, but I think it's an interesting moment as well, is when you think about what a national team coach is. Like, you'll notice that most of the coaches at the World Cup don't have much of a track record in club football. I mean, some do, like Van Gaal. But, Gareth Southgate's never coached a club, right? He's never managed a club. And it's like, I don't even know if Deschamps has. It's a different thing. Coaching a national team, which is mostly tournament football, etc. Like, there, lots of so it's much more of an opportunity in a way, because you can see like the dearth of black coaches in Europe at a club level, is very stark. But there's actually much more of an opportunity, I think, with national team football for coaches to, like, often it's former players that you get coaching national teams, or former good players, because the coaches who succeed at club level were usually not great players. Like Zidane, I mean, I've always wondered, like, Zidane is kind of untested as a club coach because he basically inherited this galactic side, right. And then and
there's a story that he might coach France. He might be the next France coach.
Yeah, which is fun. It'll be great. It'll be great.
There's a story that he might coach. And just another quick point. I also think that football is also a lot about football is like what you see and what you like, your perception. I think Patrick Vieira, doing very well at Crystal Palace, has shown people that he's really a product of France, but to have a black coach.
Cabo Verde.
I want to say something quickly.
Cabo Verde.
I want to say one other quick thing. You got and then you had Nuno, who was at Tottenham and Wolves. But the guy that I would really love to see coaching Europe is Pizzo Mosamani. He's actually in Saudi. He's coaching in Saudi Arabia. And people were sending around this clip where Sky News was interviewing him. I was like, that's good for the Pizzo brand, because British people are like learning about this guy. Like, a top league is learning about him. He should be, if he could get a championship side, fine. But this guy could coach a Premier League team. I would love to see him in one of the mid-level Premier League teams. It would be wonderful, because in the history of European top-class European football, at the executive level, only Marseille had a Senegalese guy as like the CEO, director of sport. At the level of club football, you had Seedorf was briefly coaching at AC Milan. You had some Thierry Henry was coaching some team in the league or whatever.
It's even Benny Haget.
And Benny is at Man United. So there's changes. But again, even before Benny could become a coach, I could see I want Pizzo Mosamani to be a coach. He's a brilliant coach. He took actually, African coaches black African coaches don't run or coach teams in North Africa. So I hope that this, you don't want to stretch this like, oh, this is what the World Cup can do. But seeing African coaches running teams, it will be great if you have Patul Masimani running a team. Yeah.
As a last question, while we're talking about Pizzo and Benny, what will it, since we're all South Africans, what is it going to take to see South Africa at the next World Cup? Why is our football perpetually in crisis? It almost feels like a pathology, and no matter how much you scratch your head to figure out whether it's a question of resources or leadership or whatever, it just seems like we suffer from chronic mediocrity where we can never make it to the biggest arena in global football.
Football needs democratic socialism.
Without watching yet another World Cup from our living rooms, having to pick sort of
Brazil. Pick Brazil.
I mean, I can tell you, look, I haven't paid attention. I mean, I haven't lived at home for many years. So I can't say like I know the answer here, but I can remember something about the 90s, right? Which is there was a massive overrepresentation of players of a particular ethnicity from South Africa. I don't even know what one.
Trying to say there were a lot of colors in the team.
Exactly, and basically, like completely over. Like you could have picked a team like an 11 players in which 7 or 8 of the players would have actually, or even more, have come from that community. So this isn't some, there's no magic or mystery to that. That was the legacy of SACOS. And basically that in the apartheid era, SACOS had actually built an infrastructure of grassroots football so that the 5-year-olds were being trained by the emerging Quentin Fortunes, etc. at the age of 19, 20, were also coaching the 5-year-olds. And there was this idea you were taught to play the game in a very structured way, very young. And so you have this thing, it's almost like Uruguay, where Uruguay has a population of 3 million and yet produces this excellence. And South Africa was doing that from that particular community, I think because of that infrastructure, which wasn't actually the case. It was like it's not just your available talent pool. It's really the
coaching
infrastructure you put in place to actually develop that talent pool that was lacking. I don't know how it is now, but definitely.
Your point is really that it's not because you're saying because they're colored. It has to do with the way that football was being organized, and the way that the game was being run, and that there was a particular kind of commitment. And then post-apartheid South Africa, that first generation reaped the benefits of it. Mm-hmm. I think the analogy that I want to use for this story about South African football is, so I always argue that the ANC in South Africa, they should lose an election. Then they get rid of all the kind of bad, it sounds like, well, I don't call it the bad elements, but as the party is currently structured, the way that it's corrupt, it's rotting from the inside. So once you go in opposition and then you rebuild, and another kind of party will come from it. I think that's the same with SAFA. Something drastic has to happen. SAFA is like the South African Football Association. Something drastic has to happen into how football is organized in South Africa. I saw an article the other day. People should read the journalism of Njabulo Ngidi, who's one of the best football journalists in South Africa. And he did a story on the corruption at the ABC Motsepe League. That's the 3rd division professional in South Africa. It's just referee bribing, people scoring 20 goals just because that 20 goals is going to get you into the 2nd division. Clubs literally in the middle of the night, moving from one city to the next with franchise buying.
Top flight football as well.
Yeah, there's historical clubs that are gone. There's no more Wits University.
Yes, Wits, my team.
Yeah, because Wits got bought by some outfit from the northern province. Then that pop up in Cape Town. So it's there has to be the level of corruption in South African football needs to be arrested. The fact that there is a small, the way that it's structured, the same club owners also running the professional league, also the president of or not the president, but at the top level of the Football Association. There's very little development. There's just it's not good. And this is my last point. It also links back to questions of the nation. We come full circle to Habsburg. It links back to questions of the nation. In women's football, for example, one of the best footballers that went with that team that went to the World Cup in 2019 in France was the daughter of Congolese refugees that came to live in Cape Town. And by the way, who herself, that woman was a product of women's football, sort of Cape Town women's club football. If you look at men's football in South Africa, rugby does it. Yeah, rugby does it. Cricket does it. They bring in players who are the children of immigrants from Zimbabwe, from Ghana, whether it was, what was his name, Raymond Rule or Beast or whoever was from Zimbabwe. In athletics, they do it, like players whose parents come from Ghana, who come from Nigeria. They start running for South Africa. For some strange and bizarre reason, football seems to not want to do that. And you've had, like, I think there's a Colombian footballer who wants to play for South Africa. There's a footballer, I think, from Serbia who play for the top for Mamelodi Sundowns and Kaizer Chiefs. But for some reason, the South African Football Association doesn't want to fast track them. You have an immigrant population, Nigerians, Senegalese. They're now South African. Pick them. Pick them is my last word on this.
Sure, we'll go to the president. Campaign starts now.
Yes.
I
need like 12 bodyguards to pull that.
Well, Tony and I are here to be your first two.
Yeah. There you go.
You're gonna make a meme out of me shouting, "Pick them, pick them." Okay.
Sean, Tony, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. Now it was a wonderful conversation. I hope all your predictions come true, and to you, our viewers and listeners,
Charleston for the Golden Boot.
Who for the Golden
Boot? Richarlison.
Richarlison. I support you 100%. Thank you for tuning in. Everyone, go watch the World Cup. Tell us your predictions. Tell us who you want to win. And we'll all exchange notes. Follow the AIAC odds on Twitter. Sean's been doing a great job running that. Let's see if he's on the money or off the ball. And thank you for listening. Cheers.
Thanks.